Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar will be about creating retro anime characters in Clip Studio Paint, presented by David Liu. Before we begin the webinar, there are some housekeeping items that we'd like to go through. The webinar will be approximately 1 hour long. All attendees will be muted. Question and answer session will be during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Attendees can ask questions in the GoToWebinar question box right away. Due to time constraints, not all questions will be answered. This webinar will be recorded. The recording will be shared on social media and will be sent via email to all registrants and attendees. The panelists for this webinar are Marie Quiñones, myself, Joanna Brower, and David Liu. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time or have never heard about Clip Studio Paint, Clip Studio Paint is your all-in-one solution for stunning, ready-to-publish illustrations, comics, manga, and animations. Learn more at clipstudio.net/n and graphicsly.com. And with that, we'll present David Liu and his webinar, Creating Retro Anime Characters in Clip Studio Paint. Thank you so much.
Hello, how are you guys doing? This is David Liu, Angry Asian, or Angry D, or D.SLOOGIE, D.SLOOGS, etc., etc. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to be drawing in Clip Studio. There are a lot of people here, so I'm going to actually record for anyone that may miss it. So I'm going to start the recording now. I'm actually going to put this onto probably YouTube later on for anyone that missed it, so we can watch it on demand. But let me get this started. Let's share Clip Studio. Cool. All right. Does everybody see my screen? I think. All right. So this is kind of a new thing. I haven't actually drawn anything on a blank canvas in front of people live. It's usually I would go straight into line work. So I figured let's approach this kind of with my normal process of how I'd start. So usually the first thing I do is I go into pencil tool. My favorite sketching tool is the colored pencil. It's very light, and I can tilt my pen sideways to get a bigger sort of brush, just to like help me map out my ideas. I am currently drawing on a Cintiq Pro 32. Thanks to my job, I work as an art director at The Odd Gentleman, and for our work, they gave me one of these to create my art on. So it's been an amazing experience so far, being able to play with that. So as you can see on the bottom right, I have the sort of like an older drawing of Space Maria. I'm going to be sort of not really using that as references. I've drawn this character a ton, and it's like something that I've made up, but that's more so for what you guys can see of what I'm kind of aiming for in regards to like final execution, though I may add in a bit more. I like adding a lot of toning layers, so I might actually do a bit more of that than what's shown in the image. So right now I'm just blocking out the main sort of shapes that I want to aim for, sort of mapping out where my key pieces will go. Trying to stay relatively zoomed out just so that I can get a feel for how everything looks. Occasionally I'll glance at the navigator just so I can kind of see like how it's all meshing together. I like to also draw my center lines just so that I can make sure that things are not looking skewed. And then I like to draw in sort of like the main torso shape, so I can kind of get a feel how it's all going to segment together. reference in where I like to draw the shoulders coming in. Yeah, again, it's all just main block out shapes just to kind of get an idea. Keeping the details very vague so that these vague shapes, in my mind, I can kind of visualize like how it'll fit in a three-dimensional space. And so keeping the shapes sort of blocked out and vague helps me visualize that when it comes to actually like putting in the detail. Now, since I got this Cintiq, I used to draw on an older Cintiq 21UX from like 10 years ago, and I would draw it with it relatively flat, but because this guy is so big and it's on their Ergo Pro stand, which I highly recommend if you guys can get a handle on it, I've been drawing it more like in sort of vertical mode, like if I were painting on a canvas or an easel, which was difficult at first doing line work, but I actually got really used to it, and so this is like my preferred way to draw now, which is something that I didn't see myself doing like 10 or 15 years ago. Back then, it would have been drawing like heads down on a table, with my nose like almost touching the paper. I remember like growing up, my dad would give me a lot of grief when he'd see me drawing at the dinner table, and like my nose was just right up there. He said, "You're gonna go blind. You're gonna have to wear glasses." And so now I'm sitting up all proper and stuff. I'm sure he'll be super proud. Alright, let's get in some of this hair here. Alright, so face details, I like to start with the brow line and then the overall eye shape. And kind of make sure my spacing is good. I also like to draw in a vague shape of how the nose will be. Gives me an idea of how it'll fit in the space. Okay, so now I can see that things are a bit skewed, so this is where I go in. I have my hotkey set to Q for my, what's it called? Lasso Tool. So this way I can go and adjust proportions to make sure that things are placed in the right area. I used to be against this back when I started doing digital art, coming from drawing on paper, because you can't do this on paper. And so I would just erase and redraw, but it got really frustrating trying to learn new techniques, because I wasn't doing these micro adjustments to sort of understand it better. So this is something that I highly recommend for those that are trying to find like their style or learn how to get proportions and things correct on a certain art style. Just shift it around and see like, I mean, the trick is like you want to unlock it in your mind that this is how this is supposed to look and this is in the right direction. And so it sometimes takes more effort to erase and redraw and draw it incorrectly and do it over and over again, and you're just trying to figure out where the nose is supposed to be. So instead of having to redraw the nose a billion times, just draw it once and move it around. And this is also just a rough stage too, so no harm, no foul. I've sometimes run into problems before where I would actually like my rough sketch a lot more than my final, just because there's so much character in like the really, really early roughs. And so it's sometimes it's a mixed bag, and it's like, man, I like my sketch better. All right. Another thing I like to do is flip. Adjust. So because of this colored pencil tool, you'll notice that I'm also drawing on pure black, but because I'm sketching so lightly, it comes off light gray. So that being said, if I needed to actually like lock in a detail that I want to make sure that I get this right spot, like I can press down harder so that I don't lose that line when I'm going over with the cleanup. Cool, this is feeling pretty good. Probably shrink this down a little bit. The top of the ear should not be above the eye. Of course, that depends on the kind of style that you're aiming to do. And generally, the jaw line kind of meets the bottom of the ear as well. But I'm also not like anatomy expert, but this is kind of taking what works and bringing it here. Oh, and if you guys hear dogs and kids, I have 2 dogs and 3 kids. So, of course, everyone's working from home nowadays. So my apologies if there's any sort of background noise. Okay. Let's flip it back. I see, bring my pencil tool back up. Another shortcut I really like is using the resizing your tool with the brackets. So it's been really easy to like, okay, I'm going to get in vague shapes here in the outline, and then I can bring it in shorter and then draw in the smaller, finer details. Yeah, hairline's feeling pretty good. Let's see. Thanks, side parts. Fluff in some of these a bit more. Cool. Adjustment here. Now, in case a lot of you guys didn't know, one of my biggest sort of retro anime inspirations is Kenichi Sonoda of Gunsmith Cat's fame and Bubblegum Crisis. I've always been infatuated with his style and felt that I just like the way he drew eyes and hair and sort of like how he shapes his characters' faces, and it's been one of my biggest influences as far as like this art goes. Like there's at first it was Ranma, but then over the years of drawing anime characters with like really big eyes, like Rumiko Takahashi style, it wasn't the style that really fit naturally for me. And so I always felt that my style was a mix of sort of the big-eyed approach, but it was always more subdued. Sort of like it has like a foot in realism, I guess. So I think that's reflected a bit in the art that I draw. So I'm going to readjust this guy as well. Get that bitness out there. Same with this one. Now, when I'm doing a warping here, I hold the control key so it lets you do like a free warp as opposed to like an even transform. It's a good way to just kind of line up details and shapes. All right. Cool. Let's draw more of the muscular detail. So you can see I'm just pressing a little bit harder and it's giving me more of that sort of separation that I'm wanting so that when I go into cleanup, I don't get confused with my details. Okay. Eye still feels a little off, so I may adjust this bit here. I remember started doing this back in junior high. I think one of the animes that got me really into it was watching the animated series of Ranma. I think I was in 6th grade. It's crazy to think now because I don't think I would even show like my son when he gets into 6th grade ramen, because I feel like it's something it's just lost to an era. But that's one of the styles that sort of got me into drawing it. And so since then, I've been trying to perfect sort of the facial proportions and how, and placements of how to capture that look, which has been a challenge over the years. But once I mastered it, or I felt like I mastered it enough, it was very difficult to shift into different art styles, like doing Western style comic books, or sort of like a softer Disney approach, because the proportions were different than what I taught myself. But it's been fun, like learning those different styles and trying to capture that into different pieces of work that I do. And so a lot of the work I do, like for The Odd Gentleman, is not anime. It's a lot of different styles. It's kind of its own style. So it's kind of a cool hybrid to sort of mix in different breadths of work that are a part of you, but it still feels like your own, feels unique. Okay, I think I'm ready to start the lines. Let's see how we are in time. Cool. All right, so let's talk about layers. So this is my rough layer here, obviously. I go straight into inks afterwards. I lower the opacity of my rough layer. Now for my inking process, I actually got gifted a cool brush that my friend Michael Doig created. It's actually a painting brush. He called it the perfect oil paint. The reason I like it is that it has a soft toothiness like a pencil. He uses this for painting his backgrounds. He's an illustrator. And so it has like this sort of painty toothiness that, like, you press down harder, it'll get darker. So I can do it real light here. And he called it the perfect oil paint because it doesn't really bleed. And so, like, if you wanted to put in a shade or something somewhere, it doesn't blend with the colors that are underneath it, but you can sort of control and sample. So here I'm doing a quick sampling with like holding Alt and just kind of sampling in the different gradients of this. So yeah, I like using this for inking lately. I used to use a pen tool that I put together. I called it, let's see, G-Pen Clean Dead. So the reason being is that I have the stabilization set up to 53. The brush size of it, it's usually like around 6 or 7 depending on how big the file is. But the reason I like this line is it's practically a dead line. Let's take a look at its settings. So as you can see here, the minimum value is 75% of full size. This is the pressure curve, like 0% and then 100%. There's like a slight stagger in there. It just kind of makes it a little interesting. And the reason I like this one is that if I'm drawing a line that I feel needs a lot of attention, like usually long straight curves, like if I need to, I can sketch lightly. So this is me barely pressing on the page. It comes out the same size. I'm like, oh wait, this is a hard line. I need to draw it harder so that I don't mess up my line. I can press down harder and it still comes out the same size. And then the other cool thing about this tool is if I draw fast, it kind of straightens out. And so it lets me sort of do some cool, interesting shapes. I've actually been approaching round shapes more polygonal. And I say that like, for if I had a circle, let's do a quick rough out of a circle. So there's my circle. I'm not like that guy that can draw that perfect circle in one go. So if I were to do this, instead of doing like, I gotta make this a perfect smooth circle, like to me, it works. It's not too bad. I actually like approaching it a bit like if it were made out of straight shapes, like if it were more rigid. And to me, that feels a bit more interesting because from a distance, it looks round. but when you get up close, you can see the ridges. I just think it's has a little bit more character, and that's just kind of the style that I've been doing. It also could be like a shortcoming of myself, but you know what, I still like it. So for today, we're not going to use the Deadline. I'm actually going to use the other one, the Perfect Oil Paint. Bring this back down. This one's not a good size. Small. Let's go to 6. All right. This one has hardly any stabilization on it. I think this one is set at 15, so it's pretty standard, just to get rid of any possible jitters. I like it because it still feels like you're sketching, so you can make lines that are not fully committal, but you're still committing. I guess this approach is more like you're crafting your line. So a lot of the sketches that I've been putting online recently have been with this approach where I could pay more attention to sort of line thickness and shape, and give it a little bit of character. Darken up some spots where light may be occluded. Gives a little bit more depth in the space. But yeah, this one just lets me do like more sketchy line work. I think this also works really well for this sort of cell quality, just because it's has more grit. All right. The only challenge with working with this is that you can't rely too much on your autofill, which you'll see that technique come in later. That's been a huge time save when it comes to doing this style of work, because it's, instead of having to like hand paint in your toning, you can just autofill. All right, so for the eyes, I like to map out the opening before I start drawing the eyelid shape. Just to make sure that I kind of get them in the right spot and in the right size, where parts of the eyelid sort of meet like evenly across. Okay. Anime eyelashes. Probably some of the hardest things to draw. It's very specific and stylized. Alright, then here's the crease on the eyelid that goes on top. This is also like one of my favorite parts of this process, is not doing the fill and just kind of seeing where everything falls. I like seeing the outline of the yeah, okay. In anime style too, you also notice a lot of similar, I guess, sort of drawing tropes, and like what parts of the face you draw. I mean, that can go for any sort of art style, but that's also something to keep in mind when jumping around with different art styles, is like what details are usually drawn when characters are created, when they draw faces. Like, and I mentioned Kenichi Sonoda earlier. If you are looking into getting into retro anime art or any kind of art style that is outside of your wheelhouse and just trying to find your sort of unique voice in it, it's definitely a good idea to sort of reference those you deem are the masters. And then from there you develop, into your own sort of take in style. I mean, right now I consider it sort of like honing your your voice and sharpening your skills so that when you do need to draw in different styles, your hand is trained to sort of recreate what you're wanting to do. It's like calibrating. All right, so let's draw some hair. This is where I kind of start doing that sort of polygon approach, where like my curves aren't all the time like perfectly curved. Call it the sideburn, but it's not really a sideburn. It's just the hair that covers your ear in the front. There's like different segments. There's the face, then there's like the bangs that go here, and then there's the quote-unquote sideburns, and then there's like the head shape part of the rest of the hair, and then it frills out to the rest, so it's like the back. But then there's also like an anime, like the sort of larger flyaways that don't really have a home. You have to kind of figure it out, which is a challenge when you're trying to recreate something in 3D, because everything kind of needs a point of origin, where in sort of retro anime styles especially, you can get away with not drawing in that detail and it still works. All right. Another thing too is that the hair usually covers eye. I try not to as much as possible, but it doesn't look like it's too bothersome now, but once you get to color, you'll notice that it kind of makes the face uneven if you cover your character's face with like a chunk of hair. Even if you draw in the line details and stuff, I usually always have the hair, even if the hair was longer, I would color the eye first, and the hair would be like magically behind her eye. Which doesn't make sense in any other application, but it does here. Alright, so let's well, I always like to map out the other ear, even if it's going to be occluded, just so that it gives me an idea of the balance, the face balance. Cool. I also tend to find myself second guessing the rough sketch underneath, and so that's why I spent more time on the rough, just so that I feel like I've mapped out the details the way that I can confidently trust them. I used to keep my roughs very loose and just like figure it out in ink, and I end up just wasting time, or I get to a part that I can't commit to and draw a good line because I'm mentally unsure if that line's supposed to be there or not. So I like to spend a bit more time now mapping out my path before I draw in all the details, so that I'm not like surprising myself with a detail that I don't know what to do with when it comes time to execute good line work. So like here, I'm still following the path. I may have deviated a bit, so I'm going to draw it out and see how it works. And again, a lot of the details here on the inside of the hair are actually going to come in the toning process. So that will come later. It'll be sort of leaving it to the shading to bring out those details instead of drawing them in. Okay. Now I am going to use the deadline tool when I start going and doing the toning, because it'll be cleaner lines. For this part, I'm actually going to keep this line work because it's more so just the key lines. I've been going back and forth between erasing my toning lines and keeping them in, because sometimes keeping them in gives it a lot of neat character. That's really fun. but it depends on like what the final product is going to look like. Cool. All right, so we got that chunk. I think I trust the rest of my other hair, but I'll come back to that in a few. So we're drawing the body. It's also kind of picking out the lines that you want to draw. It's interesting because the shape of how you draw it really dictates the actual final form. Oh, I forgot to draw her again. What's happened? On the fly. Okay.
David, do you want to go into some questions? We have so
Sure.
many.
Yeah,
I'm getting
definitely.
concerned that we might not get to enough of them.
No, let's go through as many as we need to get there, for sure.
Okay. So for one, your style is obviously very inspired by the retro anime style. Like, how did you get into that?
I've been drawing it since I was probably, let's see, how old are you in 6th grade? 13, maybe? 13, 12? Yeah, for me, I went through like a weird phase. Like when I was exposed to anime, I was like comparing it to, you're comparing it to like 90s Disney, where everything's very flat in colors. And to me, it didn't appeal. And then you watch some anime that's like realistic, and they got like, they're animating these ridiculous scenes on ones, and there's like 3 or 4 layers of toning on it, and like shading, highlight, and it's all moving. Or they're like robot parts, and I'm like, how are they doing this? And so I was infatuated with it because of how much detail they brought. And so to me, the sort of dark period back then was like, if it's not anime, it's wrong. And so, and nowadays it's, my eyes have opened to many different styles that I'm like infatuated with. Like I love Western style animation. That's sort of like Disney, like all the cartoons that we see out of Western animation now, I'm totally in love with. And they have really good animation sensibilities. And so it's kind of done a flip flop. In my opinion, yeah. Like I'm more infatuated with Western animation now than I was back then. And back then I was more interested in Japanese animation compared to now.
Do you have any favorite old time anime tropes that you really like?
You mean art style tropes or like just tropes?
Just in general. Like if you have art style tropes, that's great. You mentioned the hair before.
Yes.
I think the sideburns are like a really big trope in that era.
For sure. Yeah, you need like the big sideburns, the big fluffy hair. Like most people would draw, other artists, they would like start mapping out their head, and then they got their eyes and stuff, but like the head shape is actually including the hair. And I'm like, that's not enough hair. It needs to be like this big.
Yeah.
So I miss that trope a lot.
Yeah.
I think a lot also back then, I think they pushed they were able to push more interesting silhouettes with big hair. And so, I mean, to me nowadays, a lot of anime hair feels very similar. I think that's why a lot of people resonated with My Hero Academia, because of how ridiculous their designs were. And so, like, you can distinctly see which character is which, just, by their silhouette. And, I think that's a trope that needs to come back, the big hair.
The big hair, yeah. Do you have anything that you think is missing in the current anime style, except for the big hair?
I don't know. it's missing the retro style. Maybe that's why. That's my humble opinion.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. So I mentioned Kenichi Sonoda as a
Yeah.
reference, right? I only have his art books from the early 90s. He started moving on to different, his style evolved as with every artist. And I'm not a fan of his newer work. Like he lost a lot, in my opinion, he lost a lot of his that sort of aesthetic that
Hmm.
inspired me. Um, which is weird because like his art is still, kind of the same. It's just a little different. And so I don't
Yeah.
know if it's like it's cleaner or what, but yeah, definitely. I just love the retro anime aesthetic.
Hmm.
There's a few artists here in webinar that do different styles from that era that are amazing. Which to outsiders, they like all look the same. Like, oh, it's just retro anime from like somebody threw it out like oh, it's from the 70s. I'm like, but I didn't really feel like I needed to correct them because it's
Yeah.
they recognized it as something that looked familiar.
Yeah. Do you try to like sometimes say, oh yeah, that's definitely from the 80s and the 70s, but then it's like, no, it's actually new. Was that like
Yeah.
a goal of yours?
Yes, that actually was. It's funny you bring it. That was 100% a goal of mine. A few years back, I was drawing for work. I don't draw any anime for work, and so like I just wanted to get back into it because it was something to like unwind with. And so I started drawing this character that was very reminiscent of like Eiko from Project Eiko, and
Hmm.
Ranma, and a ponytail, and it was like a strong female character. Um, and so she didn't have a name for many years. I think we just referred to her as like the floofy hair girl. And because I would just draw her hair bigger and bigger and bigger. So I did that, and then it just took off. Which it comes back to another question I think you had asked me earlier, and from stemming from that, I got into doing some work for the Game Grumps, and
Hmm.
that stemmed 100% from the Space Marine stuff. It was because I was drawing in that style that I was passionate about, which is a testament in itself, especially for you artists out there that are trying to find your voice online and you're figuring out like what your art is going to be. Is just draw what you're passionate about, draw what you love, because I think people can feel that when they see your artwork online. They can tell when you're not fully into something or you're just doing it for a check or clout or whatever. But like if you're drawing something that you legit love, like it shows in your artwork. And so because of that, because I kept drawing the same character and she was my muse for a long time, like it sort of became something bigger than I would have ever imagined. I mean, she's on the cover of like of y'all's flyers for Clip Studio and Wacom, and these are, I don't have a lot of companies and businesses that I like really fanboy about, but it's like you guys have been a part of like my professional career for so many years, and it's an amazing thing.
Hmm. Yeah, we're always looking for like artists who are really like who really have a style that's recognizable, and that's I think it really shows like if someone's passionate. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah.
Sorry to go a little bit into the technical side. Can you talk about your setup real quick?
Yeah. Technical for my program layout or
Both.
okay. So I'm left-handed, so I like the fact that I can move all my windows to the left side, so everything's kind of here. I usually work on a 4K setup, but it's really difficult to see on a stream because the details get really small. And I want you guys to be able to sort of see the sort of behind the scenes of like, this is how David does his layers. Usually the way I would set it up is I would have, as you see this window here, if I were working on the same picture, I would go to window, new window of the same drawing, and I would, instead of having the navigator window there, I could go and zoom in on this one. I'm like, okay, I'm going to really shade in the eyes here. And then on this, I can kind of see how it's coming together without having to zoom out. Oops, too far. There. So if I were to go and shade in her eyes, and then I can look at my little thumbnail. So Clip Studio. That's how I usually like how to work in Clip Studio. A lot of the artwork I'm doing for work is involving orthographs or orthographical views for 3D artists. And so having the grid readily available and also doing the window has been really helpful with that. And so if I were doing something similar here, I have a shortcut key set up to, I think, Control and Apostrophe, and it gets me the grid. And so like I can go in and do an orthographical, like these eyes need to match up, you know, from a 3/4 view to a profile view. And then instead of having to zoom all the way out to make sure it's lined up, you know, I can work on my details here and then have my reference in the second window, you know, comparing like two different images. So that's been like my more professional workflow in that regard. As far as my setup, this is a Cintiq Pro 32. It's ginormous. It's been amazing to work on, but if you don't have the space, it's unwieldy. I had to make a big desk to use this one, so that's been helpful. As far as like drawing experiences go, drawing on Wacom has been, for me, it's been the best. I think I covered an off-brand tablet last year, and that one, it was great for the price, but it just was missing the finesse that you'd find in Wacom products. And so I came from a 10-year-old Cintiq 21UX, and I used that for about 10 years. I think it came out like 2010 or 2009 or something. The feel is the same. Like they've mastered it, and so it's even better now. And that I think is something that other companies are struggling to try and sort of hone in on. Like how do we get that Wacom feel? So yeah, that's my setup. I'm working on PC, obviously. I don't know if that's obvious. I think it's obvious. Yeah.
You have all your layers already set up.
Yes.
And you named them.
Yes, just for you guys.
You usually don't name your layers?
No, because I'm the only one touching the file.
Okay.
I know what they're gonna do, so I usually don't. So you can see here I have rough. So matte is the next thing that I go with. I bring up a pen tool that I use. I call it my G Pen Color, and it's a no stabilized pen that has like a really wide pressure. I think 0 to 100. And so I go here and use this to sort of fill in. You're like, but David, you're drawing black. It's like, no, it'll come around. Just wait. Magic. Just put that there, and this here. Okay. So I'm going to try and fill in as many gaps as I can, because this is going to be sort of my matte for the coloring process. And the toning process. It saves a lot of time. So this is me not trusting my line work because it's so thin. All right. Cool. So the next tool that I bring up is the magic wand. I have it set up to refer to all layers. Currently, I'm on this matte layer. When you refer to all layers, it will reference every layer that's visible on your canvas. So I'm going to select everything outside, and hopefully it gets everything on the outside. Perfect. So I invert it with Control-Shift-I, and now I'm highlighting the interior. I have a shortcut set to, I always get nervous pressing this, it's Alt-Delete, and it fills it in. And so with that, I have my matte. The reason why I keep it 100% is because sometimes if the opacity was lowered, it'll accidentally it won't pick up the lines that I drew in for the matte. but that also lets me see the overall silhouette. So yeah, we got the mat in there. I go in with the pen tool again and touch up anything that I feel may be off. I'll probably just fill this in just to bring the hair all the way around. This needs to be filled in there. There's two purposes for this too. In the coloring process, I'm going to be coloring on top of this, but whenever I finish it, you'll sometimes find gaps in your fill that will expose the canvas or the white space behind your drawing. And so whenever I'm done with the artwork, I bring this all the way up to 100%, and it'll fill in those with black. So now that we got the mat, oh, it's a good thing I have colors there too. Okay, so I do my base colors next.
What's the canvas size that you usually use?
Oh, I have a default setting. I set it up to 3000 by 4000 at 72 dpi. I usually go larger. This is pretty large for just a character portrait. I think 100% scale. Let's do that real quick. Reset 100%. Yeah, it's like this. It's hard for me to see.
Do you zoom in a lot generally, or do you try to not zoom in as much?
I think you mentioned
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned it at the beginning.
Yeah, if there's like a detail that I need to get right, like usually the eyes I would have to zoom in on, but that's why I like to have the navigator open or a separate window so that I can kind of view like what my workflow is. From here, I like to actually start doing the toning. So these two that are labeled toning, I set them to multiply. So highlight both, set it to a multiply, which darkens. I should set these to multiply as well. And what I do here is I set them, I usually end up at like between 30 and 40% opacity. But for when I'm working, because of the bucket tool and fill tool, I set it up a bit higher so that the bucket tool has a better reference point. So on this top one, I'm actually going to use it for my line work, which I'll be setting up with my deadline. All right, so let's set up some shading. So this is what you'll see like on a pencil Genga, which is like the sort of reference sheet for animation. This is where they kind of have everything all separated for the cell artists. This is where I draw in the shading. I'd like to say there's a technique here, but a lot of the time I usually follow my gut. Oh, to digress real quick, what I like to do is hold Control and click. If you click your picture, I'm referencing my mat now, so now I can't draw outside of my mat. So I can actually overshoot my lines and not have to worry about having to erase anything later on. Okay. So here you can see that I'm starting to bring in more of the three-dimensional shape to the hair that I didn't draw in. Let's go.
You're very methodic doing this. How long did it take you to figure out where to go with this? With the shading and the
Clip Studio actually helped me push that along relatively quick. Before, I would actually go in with just a big bulk tool to like draw in the shading lines, but there would be a lot of cleanup involved that was time consuming. Like, not gonna lie, Clip Studio and their bucket fill tool with multi-layer referencing like changed my life. It's something that I think Photoshop followed suit many years later, and I was like, finally, but you know, at that point, it's like I've already moved on. All right. I think before that I was using Psy, which feels very similar to Clip Studio, but it's missing a lot of sort of I mean, modern features that make the process a lot faster. So like for me, this is all digital art. This is something that you're doing. I wouldn't say to like save time, but there's no reason for you to not approach some of these shortcuts and things because they're there for a reason.
Yeah.
All right, so let's look here.
I mean, you get to the final stage faster, so.
Yes. Yeah. Now there's some things that you can't cheat, like painting. Painting, I think you just have to put down all those brush strokes. Like there's not really a way around that.
Yeah. Speaking of which, when and how did you get started with digital art?
So I got started back. Let's see, geez, I was like 23. Yeah. Man, I just aged myself. All right, that was like 13 or 14 years ago. I met an art mentor of mine. His name's Evan Cagle, who's an amazing artist. He's still he's still masterclass to me, and a huge inspiration. And so he was working on an animation back in the day that required digital art. And so I think the first thing I started drawing on was it was like a 4x5 or 4x3 Wacom like Intuos type of interface. And I remember it being the most challenging thing drawing diagonal lines because the screen was so small. And so that's how I learned how to do digital art. It was not graceful. It was really messy and terrible at times, but it got a lot better over the years. So that's how I got introduced to the medium. Yeah.
So before that, you were just like drawing on with pen and paper,
Yes.
and like any specific medium that you really liked. Like I know that in the earlier days, markers were really popular with anime artists or watercolors.
I didn't have the marker set up because I didn't have the money for it. So back in the day, I used to work in a restaurant full time. That was my sort of bread and butter, and art was kind of what I did around it. This was before the internet like really fully took off, like before DeviantArt and everything. And so I did a lot of my drawings like in notebooks or sketchbooks or on blank pieces of typing paper with ballpoint pens. And that's actually sort of how my friend Evan found me. I was drawing at a coffee shop, I think, one day after work. And just like, I remember telling my girlfriend, now wife at the time, like, I just need to draw, I need to get some ideas out or something. And so she's like, all right. And so I went out there by myself, and he kept walking by and like saw what I was working on. And so he's like, can I look at your drawings? I was like, sure. And he's like, he saw potential in us working together and I guess my skill set. And so that sort of serendipitous moment was definitely something that kickstarted my career and my path towards, pursuing art as a career.
It's like a movie.
It is kind of like a movie. Yeah, he's actually the one that got me the job. He got my foot in the door to get the job that I'm at now. Because before then I was back at the restaurant again. It's crazy. I at least like moved up. I think I was like managing at the time, so that was a challenge too, balancing the both.
So I'm really, really sorry to say, but you have like 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Sure.
We can probably make it 10, but just so you know.
Let's throw some color on here, and then battery. Hold on a sec. That was going fast. All right, so let's go into the coloring process real quick for the hair. So now that we have this multiply set up, I can get rid of that, go back into my first base color, highlight this. So now that we have her, I'm going to start with her skin first. I'm going to have a shortcut for G for my bucket tool. I have it. referencing reference other layers. All right, see how that feels? 2 layers. Okay. It's a little better saturated. Cool. All right, so now it's referencing all the line work that I've done, but you can see that there's cracks and things that I'll have to go back in and fill, which that's really painless. Oh. Okay. For the eyes, it's the same story. Eyes and face. So go in, fill all these cracks. A little bit there. Okay, cool. All right, let's draw on the eyes. I like to keep the eyes not quite white, so it's always a little bit under. I'll actually check this up for reference. Look at this guy. Okay. Hair color. I like to keep this separate actually, so let me do this first. So this.
Your style is like so three-dimensional. It's really
Thank
like we
you.
got a comment about that too. It's like, do you have any tips on like how to do that? Or is it just part
Yeah.
of the style in this case?
No, it's not really part of the style. I think I covered a little bit on that a bit earlier, referencing more so that when I do my rough sketch, I keep my shapes vague, so only draw the lines that I need, so that when it comes to adding in, like something like this, even if I fill it with flat color, it will still feel sort of alive because your eye will kind of fill in the form. And so it's really sort of nailing down the approach you make when it comes to drawing your overall shapes that makes it feel three-dimensional. All right, so fields go again. Cool. It's all coming together. Yeah, I want to at least get to that toning part so you guys can see that.
Yeah, I think we got time for that.
Okay. Nice. I like it when it feels nice.
Do you have anything that you especially like drawing, or like your favorite part of the process?
My favorite part is getting the good sketch done. I think that's the hardest hurdle. Starting with the blank canvas and going from that to an idea is the hardest part for me. Just because it's very easy to sort of second guess, and it's not incredibly gratifying because it's just a rough sketch, right? And then once you get over that hurdle, then the rest of it is just bringing that original sketch to life, and it becomes satisfying seeing all the colors and everything sort of come together, and it starts to feel real.
Yeah.
So I do enjoy the line work process a lot lately, though.
Do you usually start with an idea in your head, or like, I mean, you're also a professional artist, so if someone says like, please do a certain thing, how long does it usually take you to?
It depends on what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a crippling thing when it comes to like doing concept art where it's very, you immediately come with an idea and a prompt. You're like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to draw. And sometimes it's not correct. And so you get redirected and you're like, oh, okay, I got to try and calibrate. And the person that hopefully the person you're working with realizes that, so that they try to give you references and things to help you recalibrate into the vision that they they tasked you with.
Hmm.
All right, so from here, I have my multiply layer set up for the line work. What I also like to do is set another layer, which I usually do for color too. And instead of just doing a bulk multiply, I hand pick the color that I'm going to paint into it. So for the eye, I like to go a little cooler, saturate a little darker, fill that in. And now it's referencing the black line that I drew. That's why it's still darker. So I feel pretty good about that. Same thing with the hair. The way I set this up is so that you just work on its own. I can separate the hair and the body as needed because the hair is usually more messy to clean up. Let's go for a little bit here, not too far. This one. Yeah. And it's all filling nicely. Have a good day. Nice. So this one's obviously going to be hand filling that one. Sorry, right. It's like paint by numbers.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Okay, and then have the hair toned in. So now that I have it separated, I don't have to worry about going into the skin. It's all been separated out. Okay, and so for the skin layer, that one is, let's see. I always like to go a little bit redder. So we only did her face right now. So let's a bit redder, a little more saturated and darker. That's good.
By the way, just a question that we got at the beginning when you started doing the line art. Is the brush you were using, the perfect oil line brush, available somewhere?
I can talk to my friend to see if he's fine with sharing it. I don't see why not though. But yeah, I can get that available.
Yeah,
or I'll find
that
out
looks
if
like
I can make it available.
Yeah, that would be fantastic because there were a lot of questions about it.
I love it. It's my favorite line tool. It's a little unwieldy, but once you get down to figuring out like how it actually works. All right, so one more thing here, and then I'll cut it off at toning. Highlights, because highlights are easy.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna put a little light in the eye.
You've made good progress. I think everyone can see where this is going. So.
Cool. Oh, I have to fill in black here. Boop. All right, so this is where I come in with the matte. Now you can see all these gaps here from the line work and the color. It's cool though because this has like a little bit of integrity, like if it were an actual cell. I can wrap this up and it'll fill in everything else. So all the gaps that were there are no longer there.
Oh wow, yeah.
It just makes it feel a little bit cleaner.
Nice.
But all right, so for the highlights, this is really easy too. So you set this to screen at 100%, and you just sample the color. So I'm going to be using the hair color here to sample that red, and when I start painting it on, that's my highlights. For the skin, it's a little bit different. So I fill these in. Boom, boom. Clean it up a little bit if you like. Do some subtractive editing. Give it some sharp edges. Oh, that looks messed up. Fix that. Cool.
You say you messed up, but it's like, I think that's like everyone who starts out is just like, oh wow, I want to do this as fast. Yeah. And just get like the perfect anime drawing out of that. So
Thank you. So, and then for the skin, it's a little different. I actually like to sample the shading, because if I sample at 100% her skin, it comes out really bright. So I usually end up sampling this, and that gives me sort of a little extra. So this gives it that three-dimensional feel. Yeah, just to sort of give a bit more depth to it. Another trick too, since I have this color 2 set up, what I like to do is highlight that and fill that in my multiply layer, or a different multiply layer, to give it a hue. So now it's darker, but I can adjust. Oops, doesn't work. I can adjust the sort of visibility of it. And then by that same accord, add another trick. Let's add a new layer. Let's set this to overlay. If I highlight the same thing, I can control my overlay. The way overlay works is that when at 50% in the black and white spectrum, nothing will change. When you go here, it'll darken it. When you go up, it'll lighten it. So I usually start off a little bit dark. I get my gradient tool set to an oval, going from color to disappear, foreground to transparent. So set it down to, like, say, a dark blue. I can give it a little bit of life and color variance. And then I can do it all in the same layer. Let's bring in some of the highs. This works out really well on faces and stuff too. Yeah, it's just very subtle. Sort of like an ambient bounce light kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, you can decide if you want to keep your panel lines or not. Actually, I like setting this to, after I'm done with all the fill, I like to set it to overlay, because then it'll just sort of darken in a similar color.
Oh yeah, nice.
Gives it a little bit of visual movement. Yeah.
Well, you certainly
Almost
made that
made
look really easy.
So I have this I have it recorded, so I'll finish this up and then I'll post the finished version of that online, and I'll be sure to tag you guys in.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. We'll also share the whole webinar on our YouTube channel. Mario will go over that in a moment.
Cool.
So everyone can watch again later and just marvel at the whole scene the whole character you just drew out of nowhere. So I think everyone's very impressed, and it was so quick. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. I think Mario's going to take over now again and finish up the webinar.
Thanks for everyone that showed up.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joanna, and of course, thank you so much, David. So many people joined us today, and they loved your presentation, and watch your drawing inspired everyone. So before we go, let me share with you one last information that to learn more about Clip Studio Paint, please visit us on clipstudio.net/n and graphically.com. And as we mentioned earlier, the webinar is being recorded and will be shared on social media, but also on our YouTube channel, Clip Studio Paint channel, and also Graphically. And for more information about David and his projects, don't forget to follow him on his social media, Instagram as D.SLOOGIE, Twitter AngryD, and if you want to watch more of his portfolio, Angry Asian. So with that, thanks again, David.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for putting all the effort on so many questions.
Of course. I feel like we need a follow-up on this one.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, maybe we can schedule for part 2 of today's webinar. So thanks again, David, and thank you all who are still with us and share today's event on your Instagram stories. That's like really on fire. We'll see you in our next webinar. Please stay tuned and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.